All right, so we're back with Ken and Mike for the journey through Escape from Alcatraz. Last time we covered most of their childhood, Clarence and John and Alfred. And now we're kind of transitioning to their later days in their late teens and early 20s, and how they're escalating into their world, their crime world. And what I thought was really interesting is how their connection with their childhood friend Fred Breezy was their gateway into like literally the crime underworld, and that got them to really think a little differently about what they were doing. But let's start off with John, because John seemed to fall in love with somebody, and someone that he knew from a very young age, and they were always very friendly to each other. But as they got older, they realized there was a big attraction there, and how that led to, and like all the guys were starting to get involved with people, and how that kind of complicated their crime life. Because it was, what I found was really interesting is they, on paper, and the way you guys talk about them in the book, and the way Ken, you talked about them, I mean, they still have very strong moral character because of the way they were raised by their mother. And being able to raise 14 kids like that and keep everybody together and going to church. I mean, they were doing all these thefts and stuff, and they were still going to church with their parents. Every good. Sunday. They were good at home. They were good. They were just outside. They were mischievous, and they're trying to make money. They didn't like being poor. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So, gosh, as they got older, like I said, the life that they saw themselves coming up in, following their father's footstep, wasn't something that was attractive to them. I mean, they had already been harassed, bullied, teased in elementary school. It's one of the reasons why when they got into middle school, they pretty much said, okay, I've had enough of it. But, that lifestyle is really what kind of set them into where they wound up at. But it also, anytime that they met someone that accepted them as who they were, they became very loyal and good friends with them. Case in point, Fred Breezy. There were very few, to my knowledge, that they had. Now, one was, we touched a little bit about the love of his life. In fact, one of his letters that he wrote from Alcatraz to his mom, he spoke about Helen, and he called her his queen. And he even stated, I would marry her in an instant if I had the opportunity. So Helen, at a young age, while they were in elementary school, was kind of like Fred Breezy, showed John some compassion, friendship, and John just fell head over heels with her. But like most people in that town, there were two sides of a railroad tracks. You were on the right side or the left side. And of course, they were on the left side. Helen and her family were on the right side, so to speak, And it was like a Romeo and Juliet. Her father did not want her having anything to do with the Anglin family, especially John. They were prone, even as young kids, to be in trouble. You see that as people read the book, you'll hear of stories of them getting into trouble during school. Some of it was their fault, some was not their fault. But still, it was a Romeo and Juliet type scenario. So, that pretty much, like I said, will set the stage for what people will read in the book about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was really, it was sad that he was so, he's a young boy and he becomes friends with this girl. And then the father says, you're not allowed to talk to him anymore. And, she's young. She's like, what, 12 years old, 13 years old? I mean, what are you going to do? You have to listen to your dad. But it just seemed like it didn't matter. They were going to come back together no matter what, even after she got married.
Well,
So it's like one of those
important to
fated things.
remember about her family is the family. They had money. They were in the upper socioeconomic class of the community, and of course, this is back in the 50s, and social class was very important. And when she was 16, Dad bought her a car. Something that most people couldn't even dream of being so young and getting a new car from your father. And it was a status thing for the family. Like, look how much money we have. Look what we can give our children. And, then you have the Anglin family, the dirt poor farmers, and, the two of them, smitten with each other. The father's like, yeah, I'm not having it. No ways you're going to be with him. He's trouble. He gets into trouble all the time. They have no money. You have better prospects waiting for you elsewhere. And, down the road, the father actually does sort of orchestrate a marriage for Helen with somebody else. But that's a little bit of a down the road story. And, Ken can fill in the gaps for that. But that's how much the father was involved in her life, of trying to keep her on the straight and narrow. And then, of course, as you indicated, oftentimes when the parents say, he's bad, you can't be with him, what does that do for a lot of young girls? They want to be with them. They want to do what they want to do. So,
yeah.
Well, and not only was there a restriction from Helen's side of the family for John, but there actually even became some upset parents, my grandparents, with the relationship that John was having with Helen, because, like you said, the Anglin family were very dedicated to going to church. And my mom tells, which we include in the book, is a very hilarious story. My grandfather always made everyone in the family go to church, and not only just Sunday morning, but it was Sunday evening and also Wednesday evening. But they were in church one evening, and my mom said that Helen came to the window of the church, knocked on it, and John saw her, and she motioned for him to come out. And Clarence is telling them, "You better sit still, because if Daddy sees you, you're in trouble." John takes off out of church, and him and Helen take off, and there's no telling where they went. But I think my grandparents sometimes saw Helen and her sister Ruth as almost kind of like a bad influence on John and Clarence, which is kind of ironic, because her parents felt the same way about John and Clarence. So.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. And I think that whole time, after they came back from California that first time, that's when it all for John, he realized he needed to make a move, and he felt like he was in the position where he was on the potential of making some really good money, and he could provide for her the way he feels like he could provide for his queen. Right. And so that was kind of the thing. And I love the story, how he used, and you can tell this story about how he used his niece to use as kind of like a go-between at the beach to kind of ambush Helen when she was there with her current husband, and because he had gotten word that things weren't going really well in Paradise in that marriage, and he felt like he had an opening, and he immediately, being the conniving guy he is and the planner, right, he says, I gotta weigh in, and I'm gonna go do it.
Well, actually, I just want to add one story first before Ken tells that story, just to kind of give it a little bit more context. So after Helen graduated from high school, the father sent her away to Ohio, I believe, because he saw that they were sneaking around together in high school in their 15, 16, 17, around that time, and both sides kind of finally sort of realized everything we're doing isn't working. So the father sends her away in the hopes that she'll forget about John, move on. And John, of course, they were both heartbroken, but they're teens, you move on. John kind of dated a little bit, in his own community. And then Helen eventually marries Jim McIntosh, who had an eye on her for a while. And then, with John out of the picture, he makes his move. She convinces her to marry him, and she does. And they're married for a couple of years, but it's not a happy marriage. She's, she misses her home. She misses John. She's just not the man for him. And so they return back to Ruskin. And when she returns, that's when John realizes, here's my opportunity to connect with her again. And that leads to the beach scene.
Right. And what is funny is that the niece is actually my oldest sister. And my mom told the story many times to me about how that John would come by the house and grab my sister Sue and carry her to the beach and ride around with her. And of course, we didn't realize at that time exactly what he was doing until we started kind of researching a little bit. But yeah, he would use my sister, riding her around as a way to interact with Helen. And Helen was very fond of children. As if you're trying to impress your girlfriend, you either have a dog or you have
bait. You had bait
or something, or a nephew. And so I'm sure John used that as a way of breaking the ice, with Helen again. But I've always believed that it was fate that Helen and John were supposed to be together. And like I said, Helen, I knew her, and my family kept in touch with her even after the escape. And she was always kind of a part of the family. She loved John very, very much. And it's, I can see them clicking back together. It didn't take long, but like Mike said, she had now a husband, which there are several stories that my mom has told me about incidents when they would go over to Helen's house and John and Clarence would be there, and Helen's husband would also be there. I'm sure it was a very weird situation. But Helen knew that John was her love, and John knew that Helen was his love.
Yeah.
And
I really love that beach scene where he starts chatting him up, and he immediately goes in for the jugular. And he basically says, goes, doesn't sound like things are going too well here with this marriage.
That would be John.
Sounds like something you would say.
Yeah, that's pretty.
My Uncle John was very direct. My mom said he was always very funny. He was a jokester, but he was very serious, and he was very dedicated. Now, Clarence, of course, was the party-go-lucky guy, but John was my mom said that's exactly how he would talk. He would go right for the jugular vein. He wouldn't hold back.
And then they didn't really care afterwards, because when he broke the ice there and then took her for a walk on the beach, then it was just like that's when you knew it was going to happen for them. Right. And even while she was still married, they hung out and they dated.
But it seemed like your grandmother and grandfather were annoyed with him, that she was still married and they were running around.
Oh my gosh, yes. My grandmother, because as dedicated she was as a Christian, that was just, not even accepted. But and actually too, later on in the stories, as you read through the book, you'll find out that Helen and her sister were actually kind of one of the reasons why the bank robbery occurred. And my grandfather always held it against Helen and Ruth. Pretty much my children, my two boys, wound up doing what they did because of you. But there was a lot of misgiving on both sides of the family. But yeah, you can't stop love. I don't care what you do. You can temporarily put a halt to it, but if it's true love, it's going to come back.
Absolutely. Well, then they got, thick and thin with their love and their relationship. And he started feeling comfortable to start cluing her in on how he has been making money and how he's going to continue to make money. That must have been an awkward thing for him. But at the same point, he was like, I got to be honest with this woman I love. I got to tell her exactly what I'm doing. What do you remember about your family members telling you about that?
Well, the only thing that I really kind of know about the ending piece of their relationship before the bank robbery was that John and Clarence and Alfred, at some point in time, their path was supposed to lead them back to Mexico. I mean, that was where they were heading to. I cannot believe that as much love as John had for Helen, that he was going to head off to Mexico and not include her in it. And in order to do that, he would have to fill her in on what his business adventure was, which was also true for Alfred, because Alfred was dating a very young lady. We didn't know how young until the day they got caught robbing the bank, or got caught in Ohio, rather. But all of them had to include their girlfriends or whoever they were dating, because, like I said, the plan was they were supposed to only be back for a short period of time, and then they were going to be moving to Mexico. And so, that's a long distance. That's not something that you can just go back home overnight. So
Yeah.
No, and
Well,
I think
and again, to fill in another gap, when Ken said she was young, Alfred was 29 at the time. His wife was 16, and they went to I think it was in Georgia. They got married in Georgia because that was she can consent on her own. She didn't need her parents' permission to get married, and you also didn't need witnesses to get married. So they just ran off together, probably justice of the peace, got married, and then came back just before the robbery.
Wow.
So I think it's interesting that the catalyst for the robbery was Ruth and Helen. I didn't know that.
Yes.
And then also Jeanette.
It's that lifestyle. Like I said last week, once you get used to that kind of money, and they had never had that amount of money before, and they've already purchased new cars, and they're buying expensive clothes, and they're no doubt, going out to nice places to eat, and they're really wining and dining their girlfriends. And then all of a sudden, they're expecting we're going to be moving to Mexico, and this is just going to be a continuation. And then when Mickey Cohen has to inform them,
let me stop you right there, because I want to jump into that, because I think that's a perfect place to kind of transition to. They were all very excited about the prospects of working with Mickey and the plan, and they had just gotten a letter from him saying, "I want you guys to come out here. I'm going to make it worth your while." And then they decided to, and then they had to say goodbye to their girls, and they said they're going to be gone for a few weeks, maybe longer, but they will keep in contact. So they were on a quest to start their lives. They wanted to go out there to make the money that they wanted to make, doing whatever they needed to do. And they wanted to come back, and they wanted to start their lives with their women. So I would imagine it was a huge motivating factor. And so, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about when they went out there and their travel from Florida, their 2,500-mile drive from Florida to Los Angeles. And there were some things that happened along the way that I think people will be interested in.
Yeah, we've mentioned this a few times about the trip. There are pictures taken of them. I mean, it was such a big deal in the family that they took multiple pictures of the brothers getting ready to go, packing up the car to drive out to California, because that's something the family just never did. They never had the money for that. They didn't have, and even if they did, they couldn't leave the farm. That was a 24-hour, 165-day year job. So they didn't have the freedom to do that. And so they're driving out there. It's kind of this beat up old car. They're wearing, jeans and t-shirts, just dressed modestly, which we've mentioned many times. And they would stop from time to time. They would go to scenic places like the Petrified Forest, and, as they were driving across, and just take, pictures of themselves, kind of their own selfies. And at one point, just for fun, because it's a long trip, they were probably bored, a lot of it. There's nothing to do. You're looking out the window, you just see nothing but desert and scrub brush, in the Southwest. They decided to, they had to gas up one time, and they decided to leave without paying. And they sped away. Well, the whoever's at the gas station calls the police saying, "Hey, these guys just took off." And, the police tracked them down. I mean, there's, just the main road that they're taking, the main highway. It's probably the old Route 66 kind of thing. Tracks them down and pulls them over and says, hey, some guys took off that look like you that didn't pay. And they're like, oh, that wasn't us. We don't know what you're talking about. And as a matter of fact, we saw some suspicious looking people, turn off on this road over here. You might, if you hurry, you'll go get them. And so the cop turns around and goes down the road, and they get away without getting arrested, because if they been arrested, then everything would have, who knows how long they would have been incarcerated, because at the time, Alfred is still on the run, and so is Clarence. They're both, there's warrants out for their arrests. And if they'd found out who they were, then they would have gone back to prison for a lot of years, and the story would have been very different. But eventually they do make it to California. They find Mickey Cohen's house, and this is the first time they're actually meeting face to face. And he lays out the plan for them about wanting to expand his marijuana farm operation in Mexico. And there's a pilot that he's been using, not Fred Breezy, another pilot that's on his payroll, and flies him down to outside Tijuana. And he's bought a farm there, and as we have it in the book, the brothers aren't terribly impressed at first, because Tijuana is desert. There's nothing there. But he says, don't worry, I got, we've dug wells, we have enough water for marijuana, and I'm going to cut you in on a piece of the action. Whatever we sell, you get a percentage. And the brothers are, that's agreeable to them, and they make the deal essentially. But when Mickey Cohen, when they come back to his house after seeing the farm that they're going to head down the road, we've talked about this before as well, that Mickey was under investigation. He was going to the hearings that the Kennedy brothers were heading, and others who were going after organized crime leaders, and Mickey Cohen, of course, was one of them. And so there's a lot of heat on his operation. And so basically he tells them, it's like, look, guys, we're gonna have to cut this short. I just got some stuff to deal with. So, but he suggests to them, why don't you head north and go along the coast? It's just some of the prettiest country you'll ever see. It's just beautiful, as Highway 1 just goes along the Pacific Ocean. It's just a great drive. You come all this way, why don't you enjoy yourselves? And so they drive up the coast, and they eventually stop in San Francisco, and they spend a little time in San Francisco. And there's a moment when they're looking out on the bay, and what do they see in the bay?
Yeah.
Alcatraz.
They see Alcatraz, and it's sort of ironic that, this is a couple of years before they're actually sent there, but they're looking at the prison, not knowing, what fate has in store for them. And then, of course, they make their way back to Florida.
Well, I think it's funny that they kind of did the reverse route of their escape route, going from Mexico to San Francisco.
Yes.
Yes,
that's funny.
You're exactly right.
That is ironic.
Yeah,
and then, of course, as Ken has mentioned, multiple times, when they come back, they've got a wad of cash. They're buying cars. They're buying clothes, and they have those photos too. That when they're coming back, the family is like, "Wow, you guys, sure do look great, and you got all this stuff." Right. That is accompanying them in connection with, it's sort of like, Mickey gave him some advance money to spend. This is what's going to be waiting for you when we, do this new operation. And so that was the plan.
And I think that's what caught the family by surprise, was when they left. And you can see some of the photos, like Mike said, they're loading up the car, and they're in raggedy old pants. John doesn't even have a shirt on, and the car is a really old car. They have luggage strapped down to the back of the car. My mom was like, we never understood why they went, because they didn't have any money. No one knew how they were going to afford to get out there, because none of them had any money. And so my mom, tells the story about the gas station. And I'm assuming they probably did it multiple times, but John had shared that story with my mom about what happened. But my mom said that when they came back weeks later, that John had so much money, he pulled out a wad of cash that, and this is her words, it was large enough to choke a horse. And they had never seen that kind of money before.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, Clarence is driving a new car. He comes pulling up in a brand new car. Well, it wasn't brand new, but it was new to them. And then all of them start dressing. They go out and buy these nice suits. We have multiple photographs of them, and it's like night and day. It's like they left with nothing and they came back with this huge amount of cash. And no one could really kind of figure out, where did that come from? What happened? What transpired in California? And why were they going to California? They didn't know anybody in California. At least the family didn't think that. And so there's just so many little things that I can look back and stories that my relatives have told me about them that now started making sense once we started connecting the dots to Mickey Cohen, to Fred Breezy, the whole drug program that they were into. It really started making sense about what was happening and what did happen.
What were they telling their parents? Where did they get the money?
I don't think they ever mentioned where the money came from. All I know is my grandmother always associated with, she would label it blood money. Anything that she knew it wasn't honest money. Mm-hmm. And she would have nothing to do with it. If they tried to buy her anything or provide for the family, she would have nothing to do with it. She always called it blood money. I'm not sure exactly how they explained all of this money to anybody. It was definitely there. I mean, like I said, you can see it. And you can definitely tell that where they went to in California, they gave addresses to some of the places that they went to in California. It is ironic that, like Mike said, that they would wind up going through San Francisco and actually viewing the prison that they one day would be a part of and will become famous from.
It's crazy.
That's good. And then the transition from they came back, and let's talk a little bit about, they came back with wads of cash, they're buying things, buying clothes, buying cars. Eventually all that money's going to run out. And then because they thought it was going to be a bottomless pit, knowing that they were going to be in business with Mickey Cohen.
Right.
And then what happened after that?
Well, so the money lasted for a little while, but like I said, you go out and you start buying cars, and Clarence is buying new guitars, electric guitars. I mean, we have a picture of him holding it right after he bought it. He's in a nice suit himself, and they're whining and dining their girlfriends. At some point in time, it runs out. And like I said, they're very anticipating moving to Mexico. I don't really believe they were all that keen on going at first. And that's because of being separated from family. The Anglin family definitely could not have come and visited them in Mexico. They didn't have the money to leave Florida, much less go to Mexico. So I think John and them were a little hesitant at first, but then they saw, okay, this is the way for us to make a lot of money. And at some point in time, that money starts dwindling down, and then they get the bad news from Mickey Cohen. He informs them that this investigation that the Kennedy family, especially Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, was applying to him, not only to him, but to other high profile.
Just one correction, Ken. He wasn't Attorney General yet. Kennedy wasn't president. They were both senators at the time.
Yes. Well, they were in the process of becoming that.
Right. But it was before Kennedy's campaign. So
That's,
they were.
That's true.
This was the hearings were the thing that really made the Kennedy name. That introduced them on the national stage, because these hearings were televised, so millions of Americans are watching it on TV. So everybody knew what was going on, and the Kennedys were leading the charge. So that for John Kennedy, that obviously propelled him to the presidency. But that's a few years away still.
Right.
Yeah, including Mickey Cohen. He was watching it on TV too.
Oh
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So once this started and the pressure became tight onto Mickey Cohen, a lot of the stuff that he was dealing with, he already had a process of bringing drugs out of Mexico into California that was well documented. He had actually even paid off some of the police officers in Los Angeles to overlook what was happening. But when the heat from the federal government really kind of started coming on to him, he felt like, okay, I can't really risk doing this right this minute. Let's put it on hold. Let's let this blow over. I believe he thought it was going to blow over just as well as the brothers. But there again, now they're at the point where we're running low on cash. We've got to have something, you know. It was either go back to start robbing petty stores, breaking into homes, or stealing batteries out of a car. And that's not going to support the lifestyle you're now getting accustomed to. Mm-hmm. So I believe the bank job, which Alfred originally sees as an opportunity in a small town, they thought, okay, this is going to be a piece of cake, or at least Alfred did. It didn't take much to convince Clarence to jump in on board. It did take some time, though, to convince John. John at first didn't want any part of it. I believe he saw Helen. It was too much of a risk, I think, for John. He was, no, I don't want to do this. We needed to come up with another plan. But his brothers convinced him, said, we need to do this. It'd be easy cash. It'll tie us over until this thing with Mickey gets resolved. And that's pretty much what set the stage for them to plan the bank robbery.
Well, and one other thing that does convince John is obviously when you're going to rob a bank, you need to bring a gun to enforce your will on the bank tellers. And so for John, he says, okay, we'll bring a gun, but it's a fake gun, no real guns, because he didn't want to take the chance of, something tragic happening. So that was kind of the last thing that said, okay, fine, I'll do it now.
Right.
I didn't know
so,
that.
And John was a good, fast driver. In fact, my uncle Robert, call him Uncle Man, I keep referring to him as Uncle Man. He had told me before that John had a very fast car. The car he had purchased was fast, and they wanted something that was fast. They didn't actually use his car during the robbery. They had stole a car, but they parked his car good miles away in the woods, and they transferred cars once the robbery was completed. And they headed back to Ruskin, to the family. But they needed John, and I believe the small town. And it truly was. It was an easy robbery if you really look at it. I mean, they didn't have, undoubtedly, if they had any cops or any law enforcement, it was probably very few, because it didn't sound like from the testimony in the court hearings that there was really anything that stopped them. They walked in, they were there for a few minutes. They did not hurt anyone. In fact, as Mike said one time before, one of the tellers had fainted, and John and Clarence both stopped everything to give her a glass of water to make sure she was okay. I mean, that was them. They really did not want to hurt anyone.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading the whole bank robbery, first off, the whole using the fake gun, was the motivation is that they just didn't want to hurt anybody, or they want to make sure that it would be a lesser charge if they used a fake gun, if they got caught?
That's a good point. We do have a photo of the fake gun that the FBI found in Ohio when they broke in and arrested all of them. They did actually have other guns. I know John talked them into using a fake gun, the toy gun. It could have been that they felt like, if we got caught and we had a toy gun, it'd be different than if we had a real gun. I actually believe, though, it was probably more so if something was to go wrong, John didn't want in any way for anybody to get hurt, So, I mean, it would have been an intention, I mean, if the gun went off by accident, someone hit somebody, I mean, anything could have happened. But you take that equation of a live gun out of the mix, and that's what sold John on doing the bank robbery.
Yeah, the whole operation, the whole robbery, the fake gun, the woman like fainting, it just reminded me like Raising Arizona.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Very
Actually,
true,
there's another moment that happens too during the robbery, because they're they're in and out in just a few minutes. It was very quick. There was just the bank president, his wife was the secretary, and then there was a teller, and there was just three of them in the bank. That's how small it was. And they had the vault. They run in there, they grab all the bags. And as Ken had mentioned previously, it was a Friday. So Friday was back then banks weren't open on the weekend, so you had to do your banking before the weekend. So they had extra cash. It was also just before the harvest season or planting season. So the farmers needed extra cash. So according to newspaper accounts, they got away with approximately $19,000, which is like $350,000 today. For them, that was big money. And when they finished the job, they're running towards the door to make their getaway. Well, across the street from the bank, there are a couple other small little stores, and the son of the owner of the store, he was like 15 or 16, just happened to be walking toward the bank at the time. They had some money that they were going to deposit into the bank, and he sees the three, doesn't know who they are, of course. He sees the three making their way toward the door, and as they put it in the account of what happened, like a good Southern gentleman, he opens the door for them so they can get out, so they can leave, not knowing that a robbery isn't taking place at the time. And Alfred's, he's in the car ready to go, and the other two jump in the car, and he speeds off, and he doesn't realize what's going on, of course. And then, of course, when he goes into the bank, that's when it all starts going crazy, because everyone starts screaming, we've been robbed. And the owner, the president of the bank, runs out into the street screaming, "We've been robbed!" And then he faints on the sidewalk. He just passes out from the shock of it all.
Did they wear masks or anything? Any disguises?
No, none whatsoever.
Mm-mm.
Like I said, this was the first big theft or crime that they had committed. Before, they were breaking into, like I said, they were breaking into a school or to a small business after hours, or they were breaking into a car. So, one would have thought, hey, maybe you should have worn a mask, or cover your face up. But no, they didn't. This was the first time for them of doing something like this, and it was the last time for them doing something like
Well, and the other thing too is the other reason I think they didn't wear masks is, they were in Columbia, Alabama, which is about 6 hours by car from Florida. So they probably felt like even if they saw us, they won't know who we are. They had, at the time, they were using a stolen car. That was their getaway car. So even if they found the car, it couldn't be traced back to them. So they probably felt, they were completely immune from being identified.
But I would agree with you. I almost kind of felt like they were amateurs at this. Like I said, it's their very first bank robbery that we know of now. Did they rob something somewhere else and we never knew about it? I don't know. I do know about this one, and from what I have heard from my uncles, this was the very first time they had ever done anything like that. So
they didn't even know they had to unlock the vault.
There were newbies. What's that?
They didn't even know they had to unlock the vault. They went in, the vault was locked.
No,
and they had
right. Yeah, it was probably a little comical in a sense, and they really and truly got away with it. I mean, no one knew. Like Mike said, no one knew them there. They make it all the way back down to Florida. My understanding is they pretty much had gotten away. This was a done deal. They were not going to get caught.
Well, and actually that night when they make it back, they actually have a family dinner together.
Yes.
With the family not even knowing what they had done. They're sitting down there having dinner like it's just another day in the week and everything's fine. And they're planning to leave the next day. The next day is their getaway day. And a friend comes over and visits, and they go outside, and he bought, I think, what was it, a motorcycle? I think it was that he bought, and he's showing it to the family, and they take a picture of it.
Oh yeah,
just checking out the motorcycle, like, hey, and they're just calm. They're fine. They're not upset. They're not nervous. They're not acting strangely. They're just getting ready to leave the next day, and they're listening to the radio, making sure it's on the radio. Of course, it's a big news story about 3 unidentified assailants, robbing a bank, and they're just making sure that they're not coming for them. And like Ken said, they had gotten away with it. They had the money.
Well, another funny story is as they were making their way back down to Ruskin and back home, they stopped at a Sears and they order my grandmother, their mom, a brand new washer and dryer. Now, prior to this showing up, the only way they washed clothes was by a machine that was by hand. And I don't know if you remember, you kind of picture it. It had these two rollers, and they would run their clothes through it to I guess draw all the water out, press it out somehow. But I mean, that's how they wash clothes. Well, Sears and Roebuck shows up to deliver the washer and dryer, and my grandmother and everybody in the family is like, "Are you sure you're at the right house?" And they, yeah. And so they drop it off. And when she realizes where it came from, oh, she went ballistic. She called them back, or had them come back and take the washer and dryer back. She said, "I will not have that. It will not be in my house." There again, she references as blood money. She knew that her sons did not have the ability to buy her something like that unless they had done it with money that they had done in some crime, or it was not honest money, as how she would kind of say it sometimes. But that was a true story. My grandmother had nothing to do with that.
Good for her. Good for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure John and Clarence and Alfred, they saw their mom struggle all these years with 14 kids, and they were just wanting to give her something nice.
Yeah.
No, she wouldn't have anything to do with it.
Now, there's another important moment that happens that night as they're getting ready to go. Again, nobody, most likely the family had probably heard about the robbery because it's on the radio and probably on television, but they didn't have a TV. So they wouldn't have seen it, but they would have heard it most likely. So they're getting ready to go. They don't, Alfred is married at this point. He's going to get his wife, Jeanette. And John goes to Helen's house to tell her we're leaving and I want you to come with me. They're going to head up to Ohio, up to Cincinnati, because Helen's father had moved up to Ohio at this point in Cincinnati, and they're going to go and hide out there and, kind of lay low until the heat, subsides. And then with the money, their intention was to buy a farm. And guess who's there with Helen? Jim, her husband. And John basically, like Ken said, John was a straight shooter, and he basically says, "I'm leaving. I want you to come with me, ditch this guy and be with me." And Jim only agrees to this when John gives him $200, basically his bride money. Like, "Here, I'll give you $200.
He told his wife.
Let's live our lives. She wants to be with me. I want to be with her. Your marriage is over. Just face the fact we're leaving. We're never coming back, or maybe not never, but we got to get out of here quick." And so Jim does it. He does it. And then at some point, so they make arrangements. They're going to pick her up, the women up the next day. John and when John and Clarence are packing, they come back home, they're packing. Well, Robert, Uncle Man, asks them, "What are you guys doing?" So it's at this point, he doesn't know what's happened yet, but he knows something has happened at this point, because they're starting to act kind of suspiciously, like something's going on, but he doesn't know what it is. And John gives Robert $500 and says, "I want you to keep this money for just in case, because if anything happens, we might need some cash." But he doesn't tell him why, and so Robert agrees to take the money, and little did anybody in the family know that $500 literally saved their lives.
Yes. But what was kind of another interesting part to that story was Uncle Man, and he not only told the family the story, of course, everybody knew it, but he also told this guy that was interviewing him about this story. But when John gave him the $500, he took his shoes off. And I guess back then you could take the heel off of your shoe. And he put $250 in one shoe and $250 in the other shoe. And he told John, he said, "I'll hang on to it, as long as you need it." Why John did that? Maybe he just thought, okay, in case something happens, we might need some money for whatever reason. And but another part of this story, which I believe I had told Mike, I believe in one of the photos I sent you, there were two ladies standing in front of John's car. Well, that is Uncle Man's wife. And they borrowed John's car to drive to her mom's house that afternoon before John and them left the next morning. Well, in the back of the car is all the money from the bank robbery. and Uncle Man and his wife are driving around with all this cash in the back of the car. And undoubtedly they never opened up the trunk and saw it, but it was in a trunk inside of the trunk of the car. And
Wow.
So later we would find out that, oh gosh, this photo is pretty famous because the money is actually in the back of the car.
Wow. That's crazy. That's crazy.
It's very crazy.
They're just, I mean, they're very careless.
Yes.
And, the part of them, so it's just crazy how they were able to withstand and not get caught.
Yes.
It's almost childlike. Like they're just mischievous kids. That's what it feels like. It's like you're reading this and you're like,
Right.
They just seem like they're just mischievous kids, just
Yeah.
doing things that.
So set the stage a little bit for the Helen and her husband. My mom told me a story one time where the oldest sister, I believe she was number 2 in the lineup. Her name is Aunt Verna. And in fact, she plays an important story later on in one of the escapes. Actually, she's the sister that picks up Clarence when he escapes, and they wound up picking him up in right below Tampa.
Bradenton.
She's the one who picks him up. But her and my mom go over to Helen's house. They were invited over. And when they walk in the door, my mom said that it was Clarence and John, Helen and her husband. And my mom said that they sat down, they were having a glass of tea with them. Well, John sits down and Helen's husband's right beside them. Helen goes and sits in the lap of John and wraps her arms around him and kisses him on the cheek right in front of her husband. And my mom said, oh my gosh, looks at my other aunt, said, we need to leave. Something's going on here. So, it wasn't a surprise to Helen's husband that John, I believe they were actually having an affair, even while she was married, even before they left. I mean, it was clear they were already having an affair. Yeah. And it's very possible, especially from some of the letters that we have from John, that Helen actually had a child by John.
Oh, wow.
It was after he was already in prison. And I have met him. And believe it or not, guess what his name is? John. She named him John. So you tell me whether or not that's a coincidence. I don't know. But the whole family believes that he is John's son.
Is he still alive?
Yes, he is still alive.
Oh, wow.
I think I saw, is he the one that lives in Georgia? He
actually lives in Florida somewhere. I have talked to him a few times. He's we could definitely reach out to him at some point in time and see if he would be interested in talking.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a couple news articles about him, I think, when I was doing some research.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. I felt, some of the family and I myself felt like that he is John's son, and John references in some of his letters, and later in the book you'll read about these requests that John makes to the family while he's in Alcatraz. But to set the stage for what Mike was saying, when he went by that morning to pick Helen up, I believe her husband already kind of knew this is going to be the end, and it didn't take much convincing to say, and I think he suspected something already about the bank robbery, according to what Helen had said to the family later on. But John, as Mike said, agrees to pay him some money to, basically let Helen go keep your mouth shut. Here's some money. And she jumps
Did
in
he
the car.
Did he throw in the washer and dryer as well?
He should have. That might have saved him.
Negotiating position then. So what else do I want?
Yeah, undoubtedly he didn't pay enough for her. You know, this kind of reminds me of that Blake Shelton song. You know, love got me in prison, and love got me out. Because it really was. This is what got him in prison.
Great. So he left. Helen goes with him. Helen goes with him.
Yes.
So they go.
They all take off to Ohio. To Helen's mom and dad now have already moved prior to all this occurring. They had left Ruskin and had moved back to Ohio, where they were originally from. And when they get to Ohio, John and Helen and Alfred and Jeanette decide to stay with Helen's parents. Undoubtedly, they had a large enough house that could accommodate everyone. Clarence and his girlfriend decided to go get a hotel room. And so they went and checked in. And this is where we learn that when Clarence checked into the hotel, he used a faked name, his cousin's name, Carl Williams. Oh, yes, Carl. Yeah. He always used that name as his alias name whenever he was doing something he didn't want to get caught. And he gave the address. This is what is amazing. It backs up this whole California story. He gives an address in Los Angeles. Mike, you know the name of the town. What's the name of the town?
Oh, it's in Downey. Well, now it's in Downey. But he referred to it as Los Angeles.
Right. So he gives this address. They're like, who in the world, if you haven't been there before, how would you know the exact address? So he writes the address on the card as he checks into the hotel. And at this point in time, Helen had made the mistake of calling her husband. I guess she probably felt bad about it. Tells him or mentions where they're at. Well, as soon as he gets off the phone, his first call is to the authorities. Ooh. And he said, hey, you know, those three men that robbed the bank in Colombia? If you're wanting to know where they're at, and he tells them where they're at.
Wow.
Well, it didn't, before the next morning, before they woke up the next morning, early the next morning, the FBI bust into the house, Helen's parents' home, and they put a machine gun to the chest of John and also Alfred. And in fact, I didn't realize this till I read one of the stories. They said they caught John in a compromising position. Okay. Whatever that means.
Yeah, we know what that means.
And so, according to my mom, and I believe Helen, one of the FBI agents actually hits John with the butt of the gun. Pretty hard, according to what I understand. They get all of them together, march them all out into the street, of course, after they got dressed. About that time, Clarence and his girlfriend come driving up in his car, and they promptly arrest him there on the scene. There is a photo that we have of them standing on the sidewalk, and they're all dressed to the T. Oh my gosh. Clarence is in a nice, beautiful white suit, and all the girls are wearing nice clothes, and they're standing around and handcuffed at this point in time. I guess the local photographer took a picture, a newspaper, and that pretty much sets the stage for them being incarcerated.
Actually, I just want to throw in one more story. When Clarence gets arrested, Clarence. No, excuse me, Alfred. When Alfred was arrested, the FBI took a photograph of him, and we have this photograph. It's in the book, where he's sitting in a chair with his head down, kind of in despair, and Jeanette is a little behind him, kind of looking. Well, just next to Alfred is the chest where the money is. They put it all like in a big big chest, and so it's a nice little photo of him, caught. Well, there's in the newspaper account. it says that when they tried to arrest him, that Alfred tried to bribe the FBI agent. That's like, how much is it going to take to make make you look the other way so I can get out of here? And of course, it didn't work, because at this point, what did he have to lose? He's
Absolutely.
Sure.
Right.
So
I won't say anything here.
Private agent.
That's great. Well, I think this is a perfect place to end.
Yeah.
That's the stage. So I think it's awesome. And it's like I said, these guys were the gang that couldn't shoot straight.
Right.
They pulled off the most amazing
That's
escape in the world, in history, yet they just were good old boys who just couldn't get out of their own way with their crimes.
But this real quick, this is the photo though that we're talking about when they came in and they took some photos of all the items that they found. They actually did find 2 real guns and several rounds of ammunition to go with it, but they never mentioned. Now they did take a picture of it, and we have the photo of the fake toy gun. It's sitting in like a coffee cup in the bathroom. It looks like when they took the picture, but you can tell it's plastic. I mean,
yeah, it's small. It's tiny.
Anyone can look at it and tell that it's plastic.
Yeah, it's tiny.
Well,
Yes.
they probably didn't want anyone to know that they used a fake gun to do this bank robbery.
And
I don't believe it would
this,
have
of
helped
course,
them, but
this sets the stage. We'll talk about this next time with the 2 trials they had to face, and that
Oh my
was,
gosh.
that's just as much of a crazy story as the whole bank robbery. Just
Yeah,
Yes.
I can't wait to hear that.
Yeah.
it's just amazing.
I got a lot of
That
questions.
that
Yeah.
is
We'll have to wait.
That's going to blow a lot of people away. For sure.
Yes.
Fantastic, guys. Well, until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you.